During the week of November 8th to 15th, a group of 8 St. Mary's students, led by Professor Michael Vance and visiting instructor Dr. Scott McLean, embarked on a field studies trip to the United Kingdom. Their quest was to better understand how Canada's role in World War I and II is remembered. Part of the upper year course History 4840.1, Remembering World War in Britain, the students would engage with a wide variety of sites across southeast England. They arrived early on the morning of Friday, November 8th, and immediately headed to their first base of explorations, the town of Eastbourne. After getting booked into their bed and breakfast, the group immediately began a lengthy walking tour of Eastbourne's seafront. During World War II, many of the hotels, schools, and larger homes were used by the Canadian forces arriving in the United Kingdom. After a short stop for scones and tea on Eastbourne's famous pier, it was back on the tour, finishing at the city's war memorial. On the second day, the group began their studies in earnest, catching a train east to the town of Hastings. Here they visited the local museum and art gallery, learning about the local area and examining a most interesting gallery dedicated to North American Indigenous peoples. It is here because Hastings was home to one Archie Bellany, better known as Grey Owl. It was then back on the train to visit the nearby town of Bexhill, best known for its Art Deco architecture and as the home of British motor racing. Here the class visited the Bexhill Museum, which in World War I was used by the Canadians as a mess hall. They then took part in a walking tour of the town led by Dr. Luke Flanagan, a specialist on the Canadians in World War I in the region. Day 3 of the trip would prove to be an amazing and emotional highlight of the trip. The group arrived in the town of New Haven, the port from which the ill-fated Dieppe raid of August 19, 1942 was launched. The group was there to take part in the wreath-laying ceremony at the Town Remembrance Sunday celebration. The students came with 200 Canadian poppies donated by the Halifax Legion, and once they started handing them out to the gathering crowd, they were welcomed with open arms. They had the opportunity to talk to many friends and family of veterans who had served with the Canadians. One in particular that stood out recounted how his father, a Canadian, was the last man off the beach.
New Haven Chamber of Commerce, Sussex Community Development Association, New Haven Twinning Association and La Chapelle Saint-Maximin Twinning Association, St Mary's University, Halifax, Nova Scotia.
Following the ceremony, the group made its way to New Haven Fort, a Victorian fortress used by the Canadians during World War II, and now a museum. The group then moved on to the town of Seaford, visiting the town's cemetery, which has Commonwealth war graves from World War I. Students gave presentations on research they had done on 3 of the soldiers buried there. The day was finished with a visit to Tide Mills, the ruins of an 18th century flour mill that was used by the Canadians for training in hand-to-hand combat. Day 4 of the trip began with a visit to the Cuckmere Valley, part of the South Downs National Park. Here they explored the landscape, took in the chalk cliffs known as the Seven Sisters, examined World War II defenses, some of the students even venturing in one of the gun emplacements, and studying a small memorial to Canadian soldiers killed on the site in 1940 when their camp was strafed by German planes. After a short stop in the medieval village of Alfriston, where the class visited the church to see some memorial plaques there, and had some lunch, it was off to the town of Pevensey. Here they visited a Roman fort built in the 290s and the Norman castle built within its walls. During World War II, Canadian and American soldiers were stationed within the castle. They visited the nearby medieval church of St. Nicholas, built in the early 13th century. Day 5 began with an early train journey into London for a visit to the Imperial War Museum and the Mercantile Marine Memorial and Merchant Seamen's Memorial on Tower Hill, before heading to Westminster. Here the group visited the Cenotaph Memorial and other memorials in the area, as well as then finishing at Trafalgar Square. Day 6 began with a brief stop in the village of Sompting in West Sussex to take a look at a very interesting war memorial sited in the entrance to the churchyard. And of course, we spent some time looking at the ancient church once owned by the Knights Hospitallers. It was then inland into the Surrey Hills in the village of Bramshot. The church is the resting place of over 200 Canadians who died in World War I, many after the war during the outbreak of Spanish influenza. 2 students gave presentations on individuals they had researched, a soldier and a nurse. They then explored the medieval church, which has stained glass windows dedicated to Canada, woodwork decorated with beavers, and even the kneeling cushions on the benches have been lovingly decorated with Canadian provincial symbols. They then made their way to the nearby town of Liphook, which during World War I was home to a large camp and hospital used by the Canadian Army, and there were many Canadians in the area during World War II as well. After a short stop to see a bridge with a plaque dedicated to the Canadians and a planting of a row of maple trees, the group arrived at the Liphook Community Centre. Here they received as warm a welcome as could be imagined. They began their afternoon with tea and biscuits in the Canada Room, looking at many photos and plaques on the wall. Then it was upstairs where they were able to spend their time talking to volunteers and examining the archival collection related to the Canadian Army's activities and influence on the region. The influence of Canada in the area is everywhere, with many of the town's streets named after Canadian provinces, territories, and cities. The day was then finished at the nearby town of Grayshot, where they visited a Catholic cemetery with many Commonwealth war graves. 2 of the students gave presentations on the research on 2 of the individuals buried there. The final day was spent visiting 2 nationally important sites, Brookwood Commonwealth War Graves Cemetery and the RAF Memorial at Runnymede. Brookwood is a most beautiful and moving place to visit. It is the largest Commonwealth War Graves cemetery in the United Kingdom. It contains the graves of more than 2,000 Canadians who gave their lives during World War II, but it also contains the graves of others from many different countries that fought for the Allies, including American, French, Poles, Czechs, Belgians, Italians, and those from all throughout the Commonwealth. In doing so, it not only reflects the global nature of the conflict, but also allows the visitor to examine the different ways each nation commemorates their fallen. The final stop was the RAF Memorial at Runnymede. Runnymede is famous for being the site where King John was forced to sign the Magna Carta, and so it's very fitting that this memorial is sited here as people died fighting for freedom in the Second World War. The memorial is situated on a site overlooking both Windsor Castle and Heathrow Airport. Its walls list the thousands of individuals in the RAF who lost their lives but have no known graves, including 3,050 Canadians. After this visit, it was a short drive back to our hotel in Worthing and a short stop at the memorial that sits on the seafront of that town. Thanks go to all that helped make the field school possible, the great staff at SMU, and especially the students themselves for their enthusiasm and dedication.